Okay, so Tobias and the Arcane Merchant released on Christmas Eve 2024. Wow. The film was definitely impressive, but like every film on every size of every budget, every genre, it's not without its gremlins, but I think the positives do outweigh the negative with it. But you didn't come for a 30-second review, obviously. So, before I go any further, I would like to state that this is my opinion. You don't have to take what I say seriously or as the gospel, the Bible, whatever. But if you do choose to watch this all the way through, because I promise this is going to be a mammoth review. This isn't like a I'm going to talk about what I liked and didn't like, and that's the end of it. This is a full-on analysis, so it is quite long. There are going to be some things that naturally people don't agree with. Also, if you haven't seen the film yet, then what the hell are you doing? Like, seriously. There will be spoilers. So, with that out of the way, I'm just going to go straight into my first point, which was the storyline. So, the storyline of the film is very strong, and I will shortly take you through everything in detail. It's compelling, it's powerful, it keeps you on the edge of your seat. However, there are some discrepancies. The pacing of the film is bizarre, it doesn't follow a regular structure, and I think that kind of works to its advantage and kind of doesn't. Until I looked back at the timeline, I didn't think that the events of Oliver and Atherton shoving Toby into the water, I think it's the ditch at Tidmouth, and then they trigger the Warshire reset. I didn't think that was an hour and 5 minutes or so. Everything in that first act seemed to happen so quickly. There wasn't much breathing room to process what was happening. It was like small exposition, action, action, small exposition, action, action. There didn't seem like there was much explanation of certain things. But, you know, it could have made the film longer, it could have dragged that first act on for probably another hour. And honestly, I think they could have done that, and then they could have split Arcane Merchant in half. It could have been a two-parter. Like Infinity War and Endgame make up one story. According to Gustav Freytag, the plot of a story can be broken into 5 or 7 stages that form a pyramid. We start with the exposition, we establish our setting, our characters, and the overall framework. Now, Half Pariah does most of that anyway. You've got to have Half Pariah in mind when you watch this. It's like Ahsoka and Rebels, I guess. You know, you got to kind of see Rebels to understand Ahsoka fully. You can watch it without watching its predecessor, but some things aren't going to make sense, and that is completely natural. We then get to the Inciting Incident. The action begins because of a particular moment, or an incident, hence the name. We then come to our rising action. The story builds up towards its climax here. The protagonist pursues their goals, tension grows from the inciting incident, you know, the plot keeps rolling forward. So we then reach the peak of our pyramid. Now, I think the pyramid is a good structure, and this makes sense because the climax is the point where there is no way back for the protagonist, and I will get to why there is no way back later on, but that's a different matter. So, yeah, I'm waffling here, but the protagonist has to live with their actions from this point on. There is no way to undo them, there are going to be consequences due to the climax, and that's just the way it is. So as the pyramid descends, we reach the falling action, which entails the events that happen as a result of the climax. Our 6th stage is our resolution, or our catastrophe. Now, this depends on what kind of story you're going for, and this will be your protagonist or their antagonist's big defining moments where they ultimately succeed or not. The 7th and final stage is the Denouement. This is the opportunity to wrap up all the loose ends in the film as a whole. This structure is by no means universal to every book, play, yada yada, but traces of it can be applied in a lot of stories. So we're going to see how it works within the realms of Tobias and the Arcane Merchant. Exposition. The first 10 minutes of the film put various questions we may have had about Montague and how he really came to be such a powerful diesel, and also give us a degree of sympathy for him we didn't know we needed. A mysterious tram engine, who turns out to be Oliver, saves him from a cruel fate, and we see his brother, but not his face. And upon a first watch, one might assume that this is Toby. And that's technically the case. The title card plays, and we open to Toby and Henrietta conversing, and we feel that we are back to the status quo. They chuckle like old friends. Things then begin to shift. We get the final piece of exposition we need to get the plot rolling. We learn James and Henry, along with a small group of followers, they don't take kindly to the increase in diesel-hauled trains. And because Henry refuses to work with Boko, Toby has to take a goods train, the breakdown of which is Seward, an associate of Oliver's. The Inciting Incident. Upon this goods run, Seward tests Toby to see how powerful he really is by forcing a coupling breakage between Henrietta and Toby on Gordon's Hill. This forces the train to careen back down the hill and Toby has to give chase. So early into the film, the stakes are high. Henrietta is in critical danger. Toby does manage to get the train back under control, but during this, Seward notices the catalyst for the entire plot. Toby's eyes glow a bright blue as his hybrid engine takes effect. This may not seem dreadfully important to someone who has not seen the film in its entirety yet, but in the grand scheme of things, this is very consequential. Rising action. Okay, this is the really long bit. The next 2 hours could all be interpreted as our rising action, as everything is thrust into motion, but Adam does something very unusual. He seems to have 2 sets of rising action and 2 different climaxes, which is why I said the film could have done well as a 2-parter. The first section of rising action is very rapid fire. We shoot from Oliver receiving Seward's news to making his move, Daisy's arrival, Toby's journey to Ronesfield, and where he interacts with a USA S-100 tank named Rosalind. This is the big hint that there is something much bigger hidden in Toby's past. She is terrified when she sees Toby. She tries desperately to get away from him and calls him a monster. The next half an hour begins to build the tension even more as Oliver arrives on Sodor. A dream then provides foreshadowing of what is to come before Toby awakens. He wakes up next to Thomas and the two converse before Toby snaps at him violently. He brings up Montague, showing Toby's pent-up insecurities about the pannier tank from his past. The next day, James brings his followers to ambush Toby and Oliver. After this, we have a bizarre ordeal with some fuel tankers. James and Henry steal the fuel of the diesels, and then Oliver finds it. He puts it in a line and leaves it for Toby, but I'm confused because Toby and Oliver seem to be in the vicinity very quickly. I get they would have been nearby each other, but even a little, 20-second scene of Oliver saying to Toby, "Yo, found the tankers." The other thing is also, who the hell set the points towards Thomas? I get Toby might have been a bit reckless to try and prove himself, because that is Toby's whole gist, he is insecure. But I don't get it. The points are just set towards Thomas. I get, yes, he would have reversed into that siding, granted, but you think they would have set the points back away from him. If there was something that showed maybe Atherton's driver fiddling with the points, okay, fair enough. Or maybe Oliver's crew, because, I mean, the engines obviously have crews in this. The crews just don't seem to exist, which is bizarre. Maybe Oliver's crew fiddled with the fuel tankers and the brakes failed. That would make more sense, but it confuses me. It really did. As many times as I watched it, I couldn't wrap my head around it. After this, we see the full extent of Toby's insecurities. James and his followers come again, and this is the moment that I thought was initially going to be the film's climax. The reason I say this is because that's how the trailers made it out, and I think this was all a clever subversion from Tynes. He wanted to keep the big plotline of the film hidden, just like when Avengers Endgame came out, they didn't have anything about the big battle. Like, the second act of time travelling was out of the equation. We didn't know it was going to happen, and it was great. And I think that's exactly what Tynes did here. I don't want to say he got direct inspiration from Avengers Endgame, but that's how it feels. We then kind of repeat what we've already gone over. James comes back with his followers, as mentioned. And this is where he is able to find Toby's deepest insecurities. James compares Toby to Montague, saying that he wanted to help everyone too, including Gordon. And this causes Toby to completely snap. There is so much raw emotion in Tynes' voice acting here, it's absolutely superb. He glows bright blue, and honestly, the visual effects are absolutely peak. I love it. It's glorious. Anywho. After that, James basically banishes Toby. I find this weird, because surely that's not his decision to make. But James seems to be a dictator of some kind in this anyway, so it doesn't matter really. We then come to the first of our two climaxes at the end of Act 1. Oliver and Allerton lure Toby to a stretch of track near a ditch and send him reeling into it. This triggers the Warshire reset Oliver previously alluded to, and Tobias takes over consciousness. Initially, I would have considered this part of the rising action, but technically, this also means that we can't return to the status quo because Tobias is now in control of the body and Toby has nothing. Now, as we get into Act 2, we properly meet Tobias. Now, he seems like a really nice older brother figure towards Oliver, almost like the father figure that he didn't have. You know, he laughs like a hearty sailor almost when he sees Oliver and realises it's him. And so, naturally, Tobias is confused when he learns that he's been Sleepeth for 18 years, and Oliver informs him of everything that has happened. Now, I think this is the most important moment in the entire film. Because, don't get me wrong, it's not my favourite scene in the film. That's the opening scene with Montague's past. But everything in this scene changes everything. It's put into a totally different perspective. We learn that Toby technically didn't actually exist before the accident at the harbour, as the engine that Montague crashed was actually Tobias. This explains so much. Montague never calls Toby Toby. He always calls him Tobias because that's who he sees. He has no recollection of the much calmer, nicer Toby because Toby didn't exist. Toby is not the sentience of the tram engine body, that is Tobias. He actually comes from the diesel hybrid engine part of Montague. So we then see the initial part of Tobias's true nature. His anger rises and he snaps at Oliver. He only goes back to Oliver when he finds out that Toby is still alive in his head and he needs his help to get rid of him. So they decide to go on a hijinks around the island searching for the workman's coach. Because hopefully Oliver thinks that will help Tobias remember where he came from and where the machine is. Tobias formulates a plan to try and coax some kind of information out of Henrietta as to where the coach could be. He pretends to be Toby. However, the big issue is that Tobias can't imitate Toby at all, and Henrietta notices something is off. There are two big giveaways. One is that his eyes are blue now, like Montague's were, and the second is his accent. Tobias has a deep-sounding, I want to say it's a South Coast accent. He almost sounds like he could be a Londoner. And Toby is far more well-spoken in a much softer tone. On a separate note, I was going to save this for the characters part, but I think I should bring it up now. The two voices of the characters, Toby and Tobias, fit their characters perfectly. The brashness of Tobias's almost Cockney accent give him a sense of threat and aggression. These are the two key traits of his character naturally. He is voiced by the immensely talented Suddy Soap Bar Productions. On the other hand, Toby is much more gentle, with a usually calm demeanour, and naturally this throws a wrench in Tobias's plans. We are now around the halfway mark of the film. Naturally, Tobias is furious and he directs his rage at Toby, who is meddling with him. Naturally, as per his character, Toby stands up to Tobias in their share mind, but as he grows angrier and angrier and shouts at his oppressor, Tobias realises something. He knows Toby from somewhere. But we have to wait a little while to find out where exactly he knows him from. One thing Adam does immensely well is balance out the lore dumping and the movement of the narrative. We get little sprinkles and hints at some big revelation that is coming, but every time the reveal comes closer, it's left on a cliffhanger again. Building that tension higher and higher is really good. It gets the pulse racing as the narrative continues, and it keeps the viewer enticed nicely. As Tobias fits more into the mould of the villain, abusing Oliver, who we thought was our villain, but not really, he's more of an anti-hero at this point. We can see the pent-up rage within Tobias grow more and more. As he has a meeting with Thomas and some of the engines that want to keep Toby on the island, Thomas strikes a nerve in Tobias. He gets angry. He snarls like an animal, and I will come back to this because it's very important, and little cracks form around his eyes. Allerton sees this and intervenes rapidly to stop Tobias from blowing his cover, telling him he has a goods train to take. However, in the moments after this, he ditches the train before ramming it off the rails and murdering the guard brutally. We cut back to a screaming Toby, and here is where I noticed a brilliant little detail. Near enough every time we cut to these moments in Toby and Tobias's head, the camera zooms inwards as if phasing into their mind. It's subtle, but I think it's really, really good. It's as Tobias spins around to face Toby that we realise that he has now fully become the villain of this. He is owning it. He is back as himself, as he says.
I'm starting to feel like myself again.
And I don't know what it is about this reveal, with his black eyes, his glowing blue pupils, and the black cracks forming around his eyes, but it felt really good. I don't know why. Don't get me wrong, I'm one of those people who roots for the villain in a film. Tobias also says to Toby that now he knows what it's like to kill as well, something that Toby knows all too well, and Tobias knows this because he was there. Technically, yes and no, but he knows. He can see into Toby's mind. Anyway, he shows a flashback of Toby killing Montague, and there is a reflection scene here. Little do we know, but this is actually a parallel. Toby is staring at himself, at Montague, as his face vanishes and is replaced by the smokebox door. And this is where we officially get that massive reveal that Toby is actually a copy of Montague. Tobias tries to gain the upper hand by torturing Toby psychologically even further, trying to get him to that breaking point, just like he did to Oliver. Only after seeing visions of his biggest insecurities does Toby admit everything. He is Montague. He's a monster. The reflection under Toby even briefly flashes to an image of Montague, and here Toby becomes a parallel to Oliver. Both have been tortured emotionally by Tobias and are at near breaking points. However, there is an ounce of fight left in Toby as he proclaims he still has friends. Little does he know, this is the ammunition Tobias needs to deliver the final blow to Toby. The breaking point, and what I consider to be the ultimate climax, is now right around the corner. The climax. I did say previously, Toby and Tobias switching place is a climax, and I agree still, but only for the first act of the film. The main climax of the film, the point of no return for Toby, is the very next scene. It opens to a bloody red sky over the sheds, all of the engines gathering to figure out what they have to do. James delivers a monologue about dragging Toby off the island as the camera gets closer to James. This is the moment he makes himself bigger than Toby, but as he speaks the devil's name, he appears. This scene feels like it should be the big reveal. Tobias' sinister secret is about to be shown to all of the engines, and it technically is. Just not in the way you hope it is. Henrietta claims she knows Tobias isn't her Toby, and you think there is going to be a moment of realisation as James looks to Henry. The two exchange confused expressions, but Tobias immediately shuts it all down, resorting to his emotional gaslighting tactics. Tobias told Toby he was going to reveal to all of the engines who he really was, and he does exactly that. He turns around claiming he is not their friend, not their saviour, and that they are all in his life now. Something that Tobias keeps on saying. This is his life.
We're all in my life now!
As Thomas tries to get through to Tobias, we think it's worked. Maybe Tobias is going to turn over a new leaf, but no. He reveals his true colours as his eyes shift once more. Channeling his rage, he sends Thomas flying against the wall and a fandom of hearts break. Tobias continues to ram him into the wall, the camera cutting back from the helpless engines and Thomas to the wild animal that is Tobias, growling and snarling as he continues, not relenting at all. The attack feels like it lasts an eternity, but in reality it lasts a mere minute as Thomas is murdered brutally at the hands of the twisted tram. This is it. The climax of the last hour of Tobias and Toby's body has built up to this. This is the final nail in Toby's coffin. All of the engines have witnessed him savagely kill one of their own under a fittingly blood-red sky, and they will no longer trust him. The engine that has stood by his side no matter what. The first engine to support him when he begs for help against Montague. The very engine that introduces him to life on Sodor and champions him to the others is obliterated. Absolutely heartbroken. Toby seemingly withers away. There is nothing left for him to fight for, and the screen goes black. Falling action. As everything calms down and realisation sinks in, the next series of shots show life right after the tragic events of the climax. The engines go about their jobs in fear of Tobias as he skulks around. We don't see his face, but we can imagine it vividly. It's the classic villain triumph. Think Scar from The Lion King after killing Mufasa. He revels in his victory by lording over the Pride Lands, and that is basically what Tobias is doing. He has killed Thomas and seemingly Toby too, and so no one will stop him. The following morning, Oliver has the most pivotal moment he will ever have as a character. He leaves. Tobias notices he has taken the crane and assumes he has made a run for the designer's machine to become a hybrid. Little does he know, Oliver has outsmarted him and follows him to the machine, and this is where I can't help but root for Oliver despite all he's done. Catastrophe and/or resolution. After Henry sees Oliver and Tobias leave the island, we get my second favourite scene in the film, as James and Henry basically execute Order 66. The Diesels and those loyal to Toby are rounded up, Sodor basically becomes a police state, and we get an absolutely incredible shot of James staring over his triumph, an orange glow cast across his angry face. We then cut back to Henrietta, Daisy and Atherton having moments of solace before Mr. Cunningham, who is Daisy's aforementioned fitter, comes to see her. As Daisy has said all along, he is a truly brilliant man, and to all of their shock, he was one of the designers. He gives them the key to getting Toby back along with a map to getting there and mobilises Henrietta somehow. I'm not even going to try and get into this one because it's confusing, to say the least.
Lord, this feels weird.
This is it now. It's all about to go down. Oliver confronts Tobias by the machine and outsmarts him. Oliver's arc comes full circle as he stands up to his oppressive brother and enters the machine as Daisy and Henrietta arrive. Pretty much everything Oliver says to Tobias is exactly what Tobias has said to him. The roles are reversed and Tobias can only stare dumbfounded through an electric fence as Oliver has his moment at last, taking his life back. With Oliver now out of the way, Tobias turns his attention to Henrietta and Daisy as the three engage in an action-packed fight. This is how you choreograph engines having a fight. It is perfect. The big wide track plan of the facility is used to its full advantage with an almost dance of a coach, a rail car and a tram fighting, I guess? It's only when Daisy and Henrietta notice the water tower they know how to actually stop Tobias. Daisy floods Tobias's engine by knocking over the tower, triggering the Warshire reset again. As I mentioned, this is the moment I felt truly cathartic watching this film again, like the last 2.5 hours of my time had been well used. The visual effects as Toby regains control are absolutely stunning. The cuts between Toby's dream and Tobias's raging cries before a tidal wave of blue clashes with the red glow of the machine above is absolute cinema. Denouement. We finally reach the final part of Freytag's narrative structure. The very bottom, level and balanced again. Or so we think. The happy ending in this film doesn't really exist because we don't know what has become of Sodor. James and Henry basically turned it into a police state when we last saw it, and then we get the terrifying visual of a blue eye and the same cracks Tobias possessed across Toby's left eye. The credits roll, leaving us with the ultimate cliffhanger. Now, there is a post-credits scene too, which I will include in this segment, as it is very, very important. We see Montague being sympathetic to Oliver, who has just been left in this predicament by Tobias. He convinces Oliver that he is more than Tobias will ever be and must stand up on his own 2 feet, so to speak. I will talk about more of this later. We then get a beautiful shot of Oliver facing the full moon. Montague's monologue becomes more and more passionate as he aggressively delivers it before Oliver. At the end, Oliver opens his eyes, revealing a bright red glow in them. And that is the end. Whew. Oh my gosh. I told you that was a long segment, but it's over now, okay? The narrative done. Cool. Great. Woohoo! Yeah. I really enjoyed going through all of that. There was much more that I wanted to say, and the script was initially much, much longer. But I wanted to try and keep this whole analysis under the 45-minute mark. So, unfortunately, I couldn't quite say everything. So, next I'm going to talk about the characters. Now, the main character in this is difficult to pinpoint. Yes, Toby is our titular character, and it is his journey we are following, but hear me out. Every character makes us feel something, whether it's pride, fear, or rage. Adam has done a superb job creating a brilliant cast of characters, all with superb fitting voice actors. I will now pick out the most important character in the film, and that is Oliver. Now, Oliver is a fascinating character. His life started on the wrong foot, and he has prospects of a better life as a hybrid engine. Ironically, it was Montague that treated Oliver better, valuing him as an ally and even confiding in him emotionally at times. It is also Montague's monologue Oliver thinks of whilst he faces the moon and his eyes glow red. However, despite this, Oliver only stays with Montague because of his blue eyes, as we find out, hoping Tobias would come out one day. When his brother finally does come back, Oliver is once again kicked down to where he was. Nobody. He was somebody to Montague, a loyal follower, and Montague's respect for him should have boosted his confidence. The tragedy of Oliver's life is that it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. He claims he's nobody and is treated as exactly that by Tobias. His loyalty to his brother is toxic and misconstrued, and it makes Oliver a very sympathetic antagonist. The contact of Tobias and the Arcane Merchant also makes Montague a much more complicated character. If Half Pariah was a standalone film, Montague would be a horrible engine, no doubt about it. But when you look at his start to life as a failed engine who was given a second lease on life, only to have that snatched away in an accident too, well, you'd be pissed off as well. Like Oliver, his whole life is one tragedy of misconstrued emotions. Whereas Oliver's loyalty is misconstrued, Montague's rage is misconstrued in Half Pariah. As previously mentioned, he doesn't see Toby when he wants his engine back. He sees Tobias, the rude, spiteful, manipulative brother to the engine that saved his life. Of course, Montague was never able to know that the real engine that took it all away from him was deep inside Toby, a shadow of what he once was. He will never know that, and he died never knowing that. It's heartbreaking, really. But once again, this is why I can root for villains so often, because they're tragic. Of course, the events of Tobias and the Arcane Merchant don't just affect Oliver, they affect everyone and provide more insight into them. James and Henry and their followers have a new light shine upon them. Thomas remains pretty consistent, but it's his good nature that sadly gets him killed. Daisy, as a new addition, stands out and is a very well written character, with a very good vocal performance to match. But despite all of these really compelling characters, I can't help but gravitate towards Oliver. Throughout the events of Tobias getting his body back, everything he worked towards for 18 years was thrown back in his face, and I think anyone would be annoyed, outright furious as a matter of fact, if that had happened to them. The music. Okay, so music has always been one of Adam's strong suits. He did pieces of music for Half Pariah, which was over 10 years ago now, and then the soundtrack for Arcane Merchant came along, with no pieces of media coming from an external source, which I think for Adam, in one of his own projects, was a first. And so, as you can imagine, the soundtrack slaps. It's so good. The music is brilliant. There are so many little bits here and there that just sound inspired. Oliver's theme is unlike anything I've ever heard before. It's so whimsical and majestic, it's intriguing and mysterious. It fits Oliver perfectly where he is at his strongest. The music as all of the engines run away from Tobias as well is superb. It sounds like a siren or like the Prowler's theme. Hang on, I'll play it now.
You run along now, children.
I think my favourite piece of music from the film is The Good Things, though. I'm a big fan of alternate rock, and it kind of feels like it could be a Linkin Park song. Linkin Park are my favourite band, so I'm biased. But it's really, really good. It starts off optimistic, but the tone keeps on getting darker, and that opening piano piece is so damn catchy. I can't play it, because Adam has banned the pieces of music unless you buy them. I'm really tempted to buy the soundtrack for Arcane Merchant though. If not, it will be free for everyone to use in a year's time, I think, or something like that. But yeah, it's The Good Things as a song is so damn catchy, and Adam is a really good singer. The visuals. So there just isn't a bad shot in this film. There just isn't. Every shot is crafted and composed to invoke subtle feelings and meanings. I mean, I may have already spoken about this before, but for me, the following really stick in my mind. In practically every shot, Tobias is a threatening character, or making himself appear bigger than others in any way. The camera is manipulated to reflect this. When he stares down at Thomas's remains, we are looking up at Tobias as the camera closes in upon him. Despite being the larger engine, Tobias always seems bigger than Oliver. And even when facing off against Toby, the camera often looks up at Tobias and down at Toby, reflecting who is the more dominant of the two in the particular moment. The time of day often reflects the mood of the shot too. It's something you have to take into account every single time. For example, Thomas is murdered by Tobias under a red sky. This one explains itself really, but there are many other examples. The montage after Thomas's death shows the engines getting on with their jobs, notably as the sun rises. You could infer this as the start of a new era on Sodor in Tobias's eye. He wanted a kingdom and now he has it. Now, you can't talk about the visuals of Arcane Merchant without talking about the VFX themselves. They are peak. Toby and Tobias's glowing eyes always look really good, especially in the scene Tobias murders the guard as they appear out of the fog like little beams. The whole scene of Toby confronting James and his followers after the fuel tanker incident too. Whoa. The way Toby just radiates blue energy is amazing, but it's disappointing we never see that happen again, even with Tobias in control. The blue bursts during both of the Warshire reset scenes are absolutely biblical as well. The way the blue mixes with the fire of the designer's machine during the second reset looks like something out of a Marvel film. And this links back to that Infinity War remark I made earlier, funnily enough. So then, after 34 minutes, the big reveal. Is Tobias and the Arcane Merchant a good film? The result is in. Drum roll please. The tension is palpable, isn't it? Are you ready? Is Arcane Merchant a good film? The answer is... yes! Despite my gripes that I have already mentioned, and a few that I will get into in a moment, this is a very good film. It's an absolute statement as to what a piece of fan media can be. For me, I think there are 3 other films that should be in this camp of what a statement. And for me, they are Half Pariah, The Little Westerner, and The Magic Railroad parody. All 3 of them stand out for different reasons, and technically a theatrical film has to be an hour long, so The Little Westerner doesn't quite cut it in this camp. But, as I've said, I don't care. It's still absolutely brilliant. All 4 of these films, to be honest, for me, are monuments in the fandom. The flaws. As great as this film is, there are naturally flaws to it. One of the most blatant is engines crossing tracks without points. When Tobias puts Oliver down in front of James and Henry, he crosses from the middle track to the right track to shove Oliver and then crosses back. But there are no sets of points for him to use. There is another instance of this, but it's the opposite. When the fence blocking Tobias from Oliver springs up, he stares dumbfounded and can't do anything. Except he can. There are 2 sets of points behind him that bypass the turntable, yet he doesn't use them. Obviously this is something you really have to be looking out for, but when I noticed it, I couldn't unnotice it, and now every time I watch this final scene, it bugs me. So, the Thomas scene. Now, this scene is brilliant in almost every way, however, I have 3 little nitpicks with it. The first is incredibly small, and I'll get it out of the way first. One of the engines that runs away is a Class 86 electric locomotive. But there are no overhead wires. Yeah, okay. It's a blink and you'll miss it moment, but my inner nerd can't handle it at all. The second is very divisive, and I'm sure I will have people in the comments either way. But the speed that Tobias rams Thomas at is absurd. I know he's a hybrid engine and that seems to turn you into a god in this universe, but still. I did some rough calculations based on the amount of sleepers he crossed before ramming Thomas, and the time it took. He was ramming Thomas at about 44 miles an hour. He was accelerating at this speed in much less than a second. For reference, the fastest car to hit 60 miles an hour did it in 1.66 seconds. Tobias could have roughly hit 60 miles an hour in less of that. Which, yeah, no. For those of you in the railworks community, you may know about the Superclass 47. Tobias is basically that. Not even joking. But yeah, for Tobias to be travelling that fast, he would need to be exerting an amount of energy that is just not possible on rails, no matter what. So how did he ram him that fast? Well, that's the magic of post-production. You can tell by how fast the steam billows out of the chimneys of stationary background engines. Once I noticed it, I couldn't take it seriously at all. You know, my heart was racing the first time I watched this, like I felt sick, I wanted to turn it off. But when I went back and rewatched it for this analysis, I thought, oh, that's how they did it. Okay. So the last nitpick is a bit crazy, to be honest. Yeah, many pieces of media in this fandom neglects the physics of steam locomotives. Thomas is thrown in like an almost toy fashion against the wall of the sheds, but he doesn't break through, despite weighing about 52 tons. Now, the average wrecking ball weighs 2.5 tons, by the way. Even if Thomas didn't break through the walls, the wooden-bodied Tobias should have been shattered by how fast he was hitting Thomas. To be fair, as Adam has said, this does all take place in a sci-fi universe called Trains 19. Get it? Because it's filmed in... Okay, fine. The only reason it just doesn't sit so well with me is because my writing strives to be realistic no matter what. And hybrid engines don't fit into that. That's just part of it. I don't hold grudges against Adam for having a sci-fi universe. I respect it, actually, because it's something different. So, my last gripe of the film. I wish more time was spent on Henry and James. I wish their little saga in the film played a bigger part. They just kind of show up every now and then as antagonists, I guess, to give Toby a reason to demonstrate his powers, but they're not true villains. A good example of 3 well-balanced villains, like this film should have had, is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. This film has 3 main villains, yet all of them are fleshed out with their own individual character arcs. Don't get me wrong though, their last moments on screen give me a lot of hope for the future. Adam has confirmed that there will be a 3rd film called Tobias and the Birch Cathedral, and I really hope we get some more on James and Henry in it, because I love it. I know they probably won't be the main antagonist of the film, but I can't help but want more of them. With all that said and done though, thank you so much for watching until the end of this analysis. I know it has been really long, but I knew I was going to have a lot to say about this film before writing the script. You don't necessarily have to agree with what I say. This is just my opinion, and if yours differs to mine, that's totally fine. You're welcome to put your input in the comments as long as it's done politely. I think that just about covers everything. I've been Wainwright Studios, and thanks for... Hang on. Wait a minute. There is something missing. Throughout the whole film it was missing, and I kind of touched on it earlier. Where was the fat controller?